All right. Good morning, everybody. Sorry about the last chapter. It's a tough one to get through, and Timothy is such a great character in this story. Luckily, the storm has passed where I'm at, and this is kind of just the remnants of it. The next day, it's kind of calming down. You'll see a guy out there surfing. I'll start and I'll join him later and do some surfing myself since it's nice outside for that. But I'm going to get going on chapter. We're going to read two chapters today. We're going to read chapter 16 and 17. It's going to be a little bit longer than what we're used to, but I'll try to just kind of get through it quickly. The big question is, how is Philip going to survive now? The island's been almost destroyed. Timothy is now gone, and yet his body remains. And Philip is still blind. It was hard enough as it was, and now it's going to be even more difficult. So stay tuned and let's figure this out and see what happens with Philip. Chapter 16. In the afternoon, I groped west along the hill, 30 or 40 feet from the last palm tree. I began to dig a grave for Timothy. I cleared palm fronds, chunks of sea grape, pieces of wood, dead fish, fan coral, and shells that the sea had thrown up. I marked out a space about 7 feet long and 4 feet wide. Then I dug with my hands. Imagine that, a blind 11-year-old boy digging a grave for the person who's basically his best friend in the world. At first, I was angry with Timothy. I said to Stu Cat, "Why did he leave us alone here?" Then, as I dug, I had other thoughts. With his great back to the storm taking its full punishment, he had made it possible for me to live. When my grandfather died, my father had said, "Philip, sometimes people die from just being very, very tired." I think that is what happened to Timothy. I also think that had I been able to see, I might not have been able to accept it all. But strangely, the darkness separated me from everything. It was as if my blindness was protecting me from fear. I buried Timothy, placing stones at the head of the grave to mark it. I didn't know what to say over the grave. I said, "Thank you, Timothy," and then turned my face to the sky. I said, "Take care of him, God. He was good to me." There didn't seem to be anything else to say, so I just stood by his grave for a while. Then I felt my way back to the spot where our hut had been. I located wood and piled it around the base of the palm tree that held our water keg and the tin box. Both were to the lee side of the storm. It took me a long time to get the keg and the tin box to the ground, but I found on opening the bung that the water was still sweet and that the matches wrapped in cellophane inside the tin box were dry. That's very fortunate. But the 2 small bars of chocolate that we had been saving for a feast were ruined. I had no taste for them anyway. Feeling it everywhere under my feet, I knew that the cave was littered with debris. I started cleaning the camp area, or what was left of it. I piled all the palm fronds frayed by the wind in one place, sticks of wet driftwood in another. With Stu Cat constantly around, I stumbled over him several times. I worked until I felt it was nearing darkness. I found one lone coconut in a mass of sea grape and broken sticks. I opened it and ate the meat, offering to share it with Stu Cat, who didn't seem interested. And he didn't sit around feeling sorry for himself. He knew that he had to get going. And sometimes in life, we just have to get on with things and get going. Then I made a bed of palm fronds and sprawled out on it, listening to the still angry sea as it tumbled around the damp cay and thinking, I must feed myself and Stu Cat. I must rebuild the hut and build another signal fire down on East Beach. Then I must spend each day listening for the sound of aircraft. I knew Timothy had already given up on any schooner entering the dangerous Devil's Mouth. I was certain that the sea had washed away Timothy's markers atop the coral reef, and I was also sure that my guide vine rope leading down to the beach had been snapped and tangled by the storm. But now, for the first time, I fully understood why Timothy had so carefully trained me to move around the island and the reef. The reef, I thought. How could I fish without any poles? They must have been washed away. Then I remembered Timothy saying that he would put them in a safe place. The trouble was he'd forgotten to tell me where. I got up and began to run my hands over each palm trunk. On one of them, I touched rope. I followed it around to the lee side with my fingers, and there they were, not 2 or 3, but at least a dozen, lashed together, each with a barbed hook and a bolt sinker. They were one more part of the legacy Timothy had left me. Timothy did all this work knowing that Philip could very well have to live on the island, on the Cay by himself. The sun came out strong in the morning. I could feel it on my face. It began to dry the island, and toward noon, I heard the first cry of a bird. They were returning. By now, I had taught myself to tell time, very roughly, simply by turning my head toward the direct warmth of the sun. The angle was almost overhead. I knew it was around noon. If it was low, then of course it was early morning or late evening. There was much to do that I hardly knew where to start. Get a campfire going, pile new wood for a signal fire, make another rain catchment for the water keg, weave a mat of palm fibers to sleep on, then make a shelter of some kind, fish the hole on the reef, inspect the palm trees to see if any coconuts were left. I didn't think any could be up there, and search the whole island to discover what the storm had deposited. It was enough work for weeks, and I said to Stucat, I don't know how we'll get it all done, but something told me I must stay very busy and not think about myself. That's true for us too. When we're feeling kind of sad and we're not feeling good about being in quarantine or this COVID thing, sometimes we just need to turn our attention to our work and our schoolwork. It seems like it piles up sometimes, but we just have to get through it and we have to do it. And then we start feeling better. And he knows this too. And I want you to draw the comparison between the things that happen in your life and what it might mean. You know, sometimes you feel like giving up with school. Sometimes you don't feel like doing things. And that's true with Philip as well, but he has no choice. It's his immediate survival. For you, when it comes to school and education and things like that, it is your long-term survival and the quality of the life you wish to have. I accomplished a lot in 3 days, even putting a new edge on Timothy's knife by honing it on coral, just meaning he sharpened it. I jabbed it into the palm nearest my new shelter so that I would always know where it was if I needed it. Without Timothy's eyes, I was finding that in my world, everything had to be very precise, an exact place for everything. On the 5th day after the storm, I began to scour the island to find out what had been cast up. It was exciting, and I knew it would take days or weeks to accomplish. I had made another cane, and beginning with East Beach, I felt my way back and forth, reaching down to touch everything that my cane struck, sometimes having to spend a long time trying to decide what it was that I held in my hands. I found several large cans and used one of them to start the time can again, dropping 5 pebbles into it so that the reckoning would begin again from the night of the storm. I discovered an old broom and a small wooden crate that would make a nice stool. I found a piece of canvas and tried to think of ways to make pants from it, but I had no needle or thread. Other than that, I found many shells, some bodies of dead birds, pieces of cork, and chunks of sponge, but nothing I could really put to good use. It was on the 6th day after the storm, when I was exploring on South Beach, that I heard the birds. Stucat was with me, as usual, and he growled when they first screeched. Their cries were angry, and I guess that 7 or 8 might be in the air. I stood listening to them, wondering what they were. Then I felt, and he knows they're birds, just what kind. Then I felt a beat of wing pass my face and an angry cry as the bird dived at me. I lashed out at it with my cane, wondering why they were attacking me. Another dived down, screaming at me, and his bill nipped the side of my head. For a moment, I was confused, not knowing whether to run for cover under the sea grape or what was left of it, or try to fight them off with my cane. There seemed to be a lot of birds. Then one pecked my forehead sharply near my eyes, and I felt blood run down my face. I started to walk back toward camp, but had taken no more than 3 or 4 steps when I tripped over a log. I fell into the sand and at the same time felt a sharp pain in the back of my head. I heard a raging screech as the bird soared up again, and then another bird dived at me. I heard Cat snarling and felt him leap up on my back, his claws digging into my flesh. There was another wild screech, and Cat left my back, leaping into the air. His snarls and the wounded screams of the bird filled the stillness over the cay. I could hear them battling in the sand. Then I heard the death caw of the bird. I lay still a moment. Finally, I crawled to where Cat had his victim. I touched him. His body was rigid, and his hair was still on edge. He was growling low and muted. Then I touched the bird. It had sounded large, but it was actually rather small. I felt the beak. It was very sharp. Slowly, Cat began to relax. Wondering what had caused the birds to attack me, I felt around in the sand. Soon my hand touched a warm shell. I couldn't blame the birds very much. I'd accidentally walked into their new nesting ground. They were fighting for survival after the storm, just as I was. I left Cat to his unexpected meal and made my way slowly back to camp. We're going to keep going. Chapter 17. 10 pebbles. So now he's been 10 days by himself since the storm. 10 pebbles had gone into my time can when I decided to do something Timothy had told me never to do. I was tired of eating fish and sea grape leaves, and I wanted to save a few green coconuts I'd managed to find on the ground. There were none left in the trees. I wanted scallops or a langosta to roast over the fire. I didn't dare go out off North Beach for scallops because of the sharks, but I thought there might be a langosta clinging to the coral at the bottom of that fish hole. Remember the fishing hole that he goes to? From what Timothy had told me, the sea entrance to the hole was too narrow for a large fish, a shark, to swim through. Barracuda, he'd said, could go through, but they were not usually dangerous. If there happened to be an octopus down there, it would have to be a very small one. The big ones were always in deep water, so he'd said it was safe for him to dive in the hole. I sharpened a stick the way Timothy had done, but I knew that if I felt a langosta, remember the langosta are the lobster with but they don't have the pinchers. They don't have the big claw pinchers. If I felt a langosta with my left hand, I would have to be very quick with my right hand, or he would use his tail to push away from me across the sand. With Cat, I went down to the reef and felt my way along until I found the familiar edges of the hole. I told Cat, if I'm not out in 20 minutes, you better jump in and get me. The crazy cat rubbed along my legs and purred. Holding the sharpened stick in my right hand, I slipped into the warm water, treading for a moment, waiting to see if anything came up. Then I ducked my head underwater, swam down a few feet, and came up again. Keep in mind, he's blind, and he's feeling around this pool out in the reef in the ocean. I was certain that nothing was in the hole aside from the usual small fish I yanked out each morning. After a few minutes, I had my courage up and dived to the bottom, holding the sharp stick in my left hand now, and using my right hand to feel the coral and rocks. Coming up now and then for air, I slowly felt my way around the bottom of the small pool, touching sea fans that waved back and forth, feeling the organ pipe coral and the bigger chunks of brain coral. Several times, I was startled when seaweed or sea fans would brush against my face and swam quickly on the surface. It must have taken me nearly 30 minutes to decide that I could hunt langosta in the hole. So he just spent about 30 minutes just checking the whole hole out. This time I dived in earnest, serious about it. I went straight down, touched the bottom, and then took a few strokes toward the coral sides of the pool. Timothy had said the langosta were always on the bottom, usually over against the rocks and coral. To my amazement, I touched one on the first sweep. I drove the sharp stick into him, swimming quickly to the surface. Panting, I shouted to Stukat, "Lobster tonight!" I swam to the edge, pushed the langosta off the stick, caught my breath again, and dived. I dived many times without touching the hard shell that meant langosta. I began sticking my hands deeper into the shells and over the ledges near the bottom. I rested a few minutes, then decided I'd make one more dive. I was happy with the lobster that was now on the reef, but it was quite small, barely a meal for Stukat myself. I dived again and this time found what seemed to be an opening into a deep hole. Remember, blind and trying to feel these holes. Or at least the hole went far back. There has to be a big lobster in there, I thought. Up I came again, filled my lungs, and dived immediately. I ran my hand back into the hole, and something grabbed it. Terrified, I put my feet against the rocks to pull away. The pain was severe. Whatever had my wrist had the strength of Timothy's arms. I jerked hard, and whatever it was came out with my arm, its tail smashing against my chest. I kicked and rose to the surface. The thing on my wrist, its teeth sunk in deep. I'm sure I screamed as I broke water, flailing toward the edge of the hole. Then the thing let loose, and I made it up over the side and out of the hole. Pain shooting up my entire arm, I lay panting on the edge of the pool and gingerly began to feel my wrist. It was bleeding, but not badly, but the teeth had sunk in deep. It wasn't a fish because the body felt long and narrow. Sometime later, I made an informed guess, kind of like a hypothesis, that it had been a large moray eel. Whatever it was, I never got back into the hole again. All right. We will do chapter 18 and 19 tomorrow, but it's time for me to get off this rock. My back is starting to hurt, and I'm going to go surfing. All right, guys. Will you take care of yourselves? We'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.